on the morning of July 2nd, 1937, the most famous female pilot in the world climbed into a twin-engine aircraft on a remote airstrip in New Guinea, with roughly 22,000 miles already behind her and just under 7,000 left to go. She was 20 hours into what should have been a routine, if exhausting, leg of the longest flight ever attempted around the globe. By that evening, she would vanish so completely that the U.S. government would spend more money searching for her than it had spent searching for any single person in its history up to that point, and still find nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no definitive answer. 87 years later, we still don't know exactly what happened to Amelia Earhart in her final hours, and that uncertainty is exactly why this case refuses to close. By 1937, Amelia Earhart had already accomplished nearly every milestone a pilot of her era could chase. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She held multiple speed and altitude records. She was, by any measure, one of the most recognizable people in America, a household name on par with major film stars of the period. But she had one ambition left: to become the first person, not just the first woman, to circumnavigate the globe along its longest possible route, roughly following the equator, a journey of nearly 29,000 miles. She wasn't doing it alone. Her navigator was Fred Noonan, a highly experienced aviator with a strong background in marine and aerial navigation, someone whose skills with celestial navigation, using the stars and a sextant to calculate position over open ocean since GPS didn't exist, were considered essential for a flight with stretches as remote as the one ahead of them. Their aircraft was a Lockheed Electra 10E, a twin-engine plane that had been specially modified for the journey, with extra fuel tanks installed to extend its range for the long oceanic legs. By the start of July, they'd already completed roughly two-thirds of the trip, flying from Oakland, California, across the southern United States, South America, Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, before reaching Lae, New Guinea. What remained was, by most accounts, the most dangerous and technically demanding stretch of the entire journey. A flight across open Pacific Ocean to Howland Island, a flat, isolated sliver of coral and sand barely 2 miles long and a half-mile wide, sitting almost exactly on the equator, roughly 2,500 miles away. To put that in perspective, Howland Island is smaller than many airport runways, surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean in every direction, with no significant landmarks to navigate by visually. Finding it required nearly perfect celestial navigation, accurate timing, and reliable radio communication, with almost no margin for error. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland Island specifically to help guide Earhart in. The plan was for the ship to transmit radio signals Earhart could use to home in on the island's location, while she radioed her own position updates back to the ship as she approached. At 10 a.m. on July 2nd, Earhart and Noonan took off from Lae. The flight proceeded largely as expected for the first several hours, with Earhart periodically radioing updates on her position and conditions. But as the flight progressed into its later hours, something became clear to the radio operators aboard the Itasca. Earhart could often hear them, just barely, but they were struggling to get clean, two-way communication established with her. Her transmissions were coming through, but often faint, broken, or arriving on frequencies that made precise direction finding difficult. As the morning wore on and Howland Island should have been coming into view, the transmissions grew more urgent. At around 7:42 a.m. local time, the Itasca received, "We must be on you but cannot see you. But gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at altitude 1,000 feet." Roughly 20 minutes later, a transmission asking the ship to take a bearing on her position by radio direction finding, indicating she was trying to use the ship's signal to physically locate the island, since visual contact clearly hadn't been made yet. The final confirmed transmission received from Earhart came at 8:43 a.m. "We are on the line 157337. We are running north and south." It's a navigational phrase, referring to a specific line of position she and Noonan had calculated, likely intended to indicate the path they planned to fly while searching for the island. And then, nothing. No further transmissions were ever received. No emergency signal. No confirmed sighting of the aircraft by anyone on the Itasca or anywhere else. The most technologically advanced long-distance flight of its era simply went silent over open ocean, and the silence never broke. What followed was, at the time, the largest and most expensive air and sea search operation in United States history. The U.S. Navy deployed ships and aircraft, including the battleship USS Colorado and the aircraft carrier USS Lexington, to scour hundreds of thousands of square miles of open Pacific Ocean over the following weeks. They found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no debris field, nothing that could be conclusively tied to Earhart's aircraft. The search was called off after roughly 2.5 weeks, an enormous undertaking that, in the end, produced no answers at all. In the absence of confirmed evidence, theories filled the vacuum, and they still do, 87 years later. The most widely accepted explanation among aviation historians is also the simplest, that Earhart and Noonan, unable to locate Howland Island after hours of searching, eventually ran out of fuel and were forced into a water landing somewhere in the open ocean, with the aircraft sinking relatively quickly afterward, leaving no surface debris for searchers to find. Given the depth of the ocean in that region, often well over 15,000 feet, locating actual wreckage on the seafloor has historically been almost impossible with the technology available for most of the 20th century. A second major theory, known as the Nikomaroro hypothesis, proposes that Earhart and Noonan, slightly off course, actually reached a different, uninhabited atoll called Nikomaroro, several hundred miles southeast of Howland Island, and survived there for some period of time before ultimately succumbing to exposure or starvation. Researchers with the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, commonly known as TIGHAR, have conducted multiple expeditions to Nikomaroro over the decades, recovering items including pieces of aluminum aircraft skin, a woman's shoe consistent with 1930s styling, and a sextant box, along with partial human skeletal remains discovered on the island back in 1940, remains that were initially analyzed and then lost before modern DNA testing could be applied, leaving their connection to Earhart formally unconfirmed to this day. None of the physical evidence recovered from Nikomaroro has been definitively, scientifically matched to Earhart's aircraft or to Earhart herself, though proponents of the theory argue the circumstantial pattern is compelling. A third, far more speculative theory holds that Earhart and Noonan were captured, either by the Japanese military, which controlled portions of the Pacific at the time amid rising pre-war tensions, or under some other geopolitical circumstance, and that her flight may have even had a covert intelligence-gathering purpose. This theory has been fueled over the decades by alleged eyewitness accounts on various Pacific islands describing a woman matching her description being held by Japanese authorities, though none of these accounts have ever been independently corroborated with verifiable physical evidence, and most professional historians regard this theory as the least supported of the major possibilities. In more recent years, advances in deep-sea sonar technology have reopened the search in ways that weren't possible in 1937. Several modern expeditions have used high-resolution sonar to scan the ocean floor near Earhart's presumed flight path, and, as recently as this past decade, at least one research team announced a sonar image showing what they described as a shape consistent with an aircraft resting on the seafloor, generating significant media attention. As of now, that finding has not been independently verified through physical recovery or additional imaging, and no expedition has yet produced conclusive, universally accepted proof of the aircraft's final resting place. Amelia Earhart was formally declared legally dead on January 5, 1939, roughly a year and a half after she vanished, a legal designation required at the time to settle her estate, not a forensic determination of what actually happened to her. That distinction matters. Being declared legally dead allowed her affairs to be settled. It never actually answered the question of where she went down, how she died, or whether Fred Noonan died alongside her or under different circumstances entirely. What makes this case endure, generation after generation, isn't just the fame of the person involved, though that's certainly part of it. It's the specific nature of the silence. There was no crash confirmed by witnesses. There was no debris field. There wasn't even a final transmission indicating immediate, certain doom. Her last words on record were calm, technical, navigational, a pilot still actively working the problem right up until contact simply stopped. That kind of ending, an ordinary-sounding transmission followed by absolute silence, leaves far more room for competing explanations than a confirmed crash ever would. We genuinely do not know, with certainty, what happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan in the hours after that final radio call. Multiple credible theories exist. None has been proven beyond reasonable dispute. If new sonar evidence or another expedition changes that in the coming years, it'll be one of the only times in the history of this channel that a case file actually gets to close. Until then, it stays open. Subscribe. Next time, we're covering one of the most disturbing unsolved serial cases in American history, and the killer who sent the police his own secret code to solve.